Hello everyone and welcome to the Freestyle Chess Grand Slam Paris tournament. This is the final match, Magnus Carlsen versus Hikaru Nakamura. Magnus gets the white pieces in the first game and that's pretty much it. Let's check it out. And well, it's just amazing that, whenever there's a tournament, whenever there's a quarterfinal, semifinal, the final bracket, it's almost always Magnus versus Hikaru in the finals. So I started doing YouTube, I would say 10 years ago. I remember in 2015, it was either November or December, and Magnus and Hikaru were playing the finals of the first ever Speed Chess Championship on chess.com. Magnus won, and I uploaded a video about that. And here we are 10 years after that event, and Magnus and Hikaru are still in the finals of a tournament with all of these elite players. So these two really are, amazing players. In case you guys are maybe new to chess. So yeah, let's check it out and see what we have here. It's a pretty cool position. Every position is different. I thought as we always open up the light square bishop, and the light square bishop nicely aligns well with the queen on this diagonal. I thought g3 or g4 would be maybe the starting move here. Maybe you even fianchetto the bishop, castle, king side right away. Something along those lines. But no, Magnus plays pawn to c4, and it is in fact pawn to c4 that is the top move recommended by the engine in this position. So that's just how awesome these guys are. Hikaru replies with pawn to c5, also the top move in the position. Knight c3, Hikaru plays it symmetrical, and knight to f3. And here Hikaru deviates with pawn to e5. And while Magnus now could strike with maybe pawn to g4, Magnus plays pawn to b4. And this is the official random Evans Gambit, and Magnus goes for it. As usual, in the Evans Gambit, you can capture with the c-pawn or with the knight. Both is interesting. For example, if you capture with the c-pawn, you give up the d5 square to the knight. And after something like d6, d4, you get a pretty crazy position. Let's say bishop to e6, Magnus would capture on e5, threaten to capture further, and Hikaru could maybe not castle. Magnus would castle, Hikaru would probably defend the pawn with pawn to f6, and you would get something like this, where Hikaru would be up a pawn, but Magnus in a slightly more active position. But Hikaru says, no thank you, I'm going to play knight captures on b5. He doesn't want any, style of the old master games against Magnus. Plays knight captures on b4, knight captures on e5, and pawn to g6. Opens up the dark square bishop. Magnus goes d4, we have castles kingside, and now knight to g4. And it's already very, very easy to go wrong here with black, with the knight having access to f6 and h6. Imagine if Hikaru played something like knight g7, all of a sudden knight f6 or knight to h6 is a smothered mate. So you have to be very, very careful. Hikaru played bishop to g7, which isn't all that impressive. Best is actually to play bishop captures on d4 and allow Magnus to sacrifice the exchange with rook captures on d4, because this bishop is the main defender of black's position. But Hikaru played bishop to g7, and what do you think should be played here? What would you play here as white, in case you haven't seen the game live? The best move for Magnus here is bishop to h6, without a doubt. And just to give you an example, if black replies only with the strongest moves recommended by the engine, let's say pawn to f5, after bishop captures and knight captures, knight to h6 check, king goes to h8, and now d5, this position is just terrible for black. But after bishop to g7, Magnus played d captures on c5, which is not as impressive. It opens up this bishop's reach to the white queen, but Magnus has something in mind for that as well. Hikaru plays first pawn to d5, opens up the position, knight h6 check, we have king to h8, and now pawn to g4. We have bishop to e6, and now c captures on d5, knight captures on d5, and bishop captures on d5. Apologies for that. Bishop captures, and bishop to b2. We have bishop back to e6. Hikaru offers a trade. This does seem like a pretty flashy move, sacrificing the knight. But of course, if you capture, there's a discovery. So, of course, Hikaru will not be capturing on h6. Hikaru plays bishop back to e6, and now pawn to g5. We have rook captures on d1. queen captures on d1, and now queen to c8. We have rook to g3, and queen captures on c5. So there was no good way to defend the c5 pawn, but Magnus actually wanted Hikaru to capture on c5, so he could activate the bishop by playing knight e4, attacking the queen, and now, okay, you can move the knight, basically, because the bishop is undefended. So queen d5, offering a queen trade, Magnus trades, captures, and now we have knight to f6. Also interesting is knight to c3, but, you know, kind of a hard move to spot, because after bishop captures on a2, you have this very, very cool bishop to a3 move, attacking the rook. So there was that. But okay, bishop captures on d5. We have knight f6 by Magnus. Bishop captures on a2. Hikaru now with the two connected pass pawns on the queen side. Rook to a3. Well, one of those pawns will be eliminated. We have bishop to e6, and rook captures on a7. We have knight to d6. And pawn to f3, and here Hikaru played rook to c8, and he allows Magnus to fully take control over the position, but it's not easy to see why. If you guys have a minute to spare, you can even pause the video and try to fully take advantage of the position, you know, while I give you a couple of seconds. So the move in question is pawn to e4. And the reason for that is that it takes away the f5 square from the knight. And now, even if you tried some fancy moves with the knight, harassing the bishop will go to d4. And once you move to d6 to defend the pawn again, now there's bishop e5. And there's the threat of captures and captures. And once the knight moves, now you go bishop g3. You prevent the rook from defending this pawn. And also you stop knight d6 to defend the pawn. The knight cannot go to a5 to defend the pawn, and that pawn will be eliminated on the next move. Or you play b5 and then rook b7, and then you capture the pawn. But that is the way for white to play. Magnus did not see it. He played bishop to e5, but both are now below 10 minutes on the clock. It's also important to play it fast. Knight f5 by Hikaru. The trick being that if you capture on b7 now, there's no trick. You're just going to capture on h6, and once everything gets traded off, you're going to go knight to g4 check, and no problem, bishop g7. There's just no good discovery here. Even if you try some other discoveries, they just don't work. All of Hikaru's stuff is on white pieces, white squares, and that's it. If knight g4 check, you're going to trade, and after captures, you have this equal endgame, bishop versus knight, pawns on the same side of the board. Not much to be done here. So after knight f5, we have knight captures, bishop captures, and rook captures on b7, bishop to e6, and now rook to b4. We have bishop captures with check, and king to g8, and we have this position where Magnus is up a pawn, but it's bishops of the opposite color, so, you know, we can expect a draw here. But there's nothing wrong in trying. You know, you're up a pawn, you can only win the game. It's hard to actually lose the game when you're up a pawn. King f2, we have rook to c5, and king to g3. We have pawn to h6, g captures, and king to h7. Hikaru for the moment giving up yet another pawn, and Magnus defends it. But this also means that your bishop is now a little bit passive. However, you do have to be careful not to get checkmated. So pawn to g5, freeing up the g6 square for the king, and now pawn to e4 by Magnus. With pawn to e3 just waiting, you know, to see what black will do. It's actually very hard for Hikaru to make a move, because if the rook ever moves, you will simply grab the 5th rank, and even if the king goes to g6, you still have to be very careful that rook can be sacrificed for the pawn. King captures, pawn to h7, pawn to h8. Complete mess of a position, and if you don't, then pawn to h4, you will trade, and then the two connected pass pawns will fight against the bishop to create a pass pawn in the center. Whether it's winning, probably, you know, maybe you can defend it with some engine perfect play, but, you know, in practical terms, it should be winning. But Magnus played pawn to e4, and now he allowed Hikaru this freeing pawn to f5 move, which, of course, you don't really gain anything by capturing, just rook captures on f5, and good luck winning this now. So after pawn to f5, rook to b7 was played, pawn to f4 check, we have king to f2, and rook to c2 with check. We have king to e1, and here there is one move that Hikaru can play that holds the game. Any other move he plays, it's a win for Magnus. Do you see which move this is? Again, have a couple of seconds to find this elusive idea. The move in question is rook captures on h2. And of course, it's the first move you look at, but then you're like, yeah, of course, it's not that if Hikaru didn't play it. But no, Hikaru played bishop to a2. I have no idea why. Probably he thought if, let's say, rook captures, then maybe Magnus has some bishop f6 check. Okay, you will capture the pawn, then maybe rook b6, attacking the bishop, and if the bishop moves, maybe there are some discoveries, but there aren't. You can just move the bishop, and there are no discoveries for this bishop. Wherever you move, it's it's a completely winning position. Maybe he thought something like bishop e7 check, then you either move the king or the pawn is captured, but it's actually perfectly fine to go to h5. If king f8 going for checkmate, you can still give a rook e2 check, and once the king moves g4, you free up your king and you can play it. Very weird decision for Hikaru. I would say Hikaru finds this in a bullet game with 5 seconds on the clock, but here in a classical game against Magnus, it's just that the stakes are different. It's the Magnus effect. Hikaru played bishop to e2, and now Magnus's position is completely winning, but only if you find a very, very particular idea. So obviously the one that Hikaru missed. Feel free to pause the video for the 4th time and win the game for Magnus while I give you a couple of seconds. The move in question is bishop to f8 check. Pawn to h, the engine also gives pawn to h4 as winning, but it's a completely useless move. Next move, you're still gonna have to play bishop to f8, so it's not much. But yeah, the reason why it's winning is that now you cannot capture the pawn. Your king is in check, and once you go king g6, rook to g7 check, and you advance the pawn into a queen. Or if you go to g8, and this is the beauty of chess, pawn to h7 check. If you capture, Magnus brings a queen into the game, and of course, if king to h8, now the bishops of opposite color really come to terms as bishop to d6. And white can resign. The light square bishop is completely useless in stopping checkmate on the dark squares. You cannot help out with the rook, and that is pretty much it. Whatever you play, unless you play some silly moves like sacrifice the rook first, bishop to e5 will be checkmate on the next move. So yeah, not something that you'd expect. Bishops of opposite color, we all know it's a draw. It's always a draw, unless you're playing against Magnus Carlsen and he manages to trick you in not capturing a pawn. Here on move 35. So yeah, it's a little bit of everything. You want to call it the Magnus effect, you want to call it whatever, but Magnus wins the first game. Hikaru will tomorrow get his chance with the white pieces. If he can equalize, we get tie breaks. If not, Magnus will be the winner of the Freestyle Chess Grand Slam Paris tournament. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope that you were able to crack those pause the video moments. I would like to thank Derek King, Charles Benjamin Flynn, Diane Schwartz, Ilya Maltsev, and Mohammed Babar Khalil for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.